Hello, Erudites, and welcome back to Next Level Catch-ups 2.0 for General Biology. Today we'll be discussing about Lesson 12. So for Lesson 12, we'll be discussing about what we call as the photosynthesis. So in the previous discussion in Lesson 11, we discussed about the different biomolecules, an overview of the different biomolecules that can be found in our bodies. So in this lesson, we'll be discussing about photosynthesis or how plants turn or create food for themselves. So let's dive straight into it. So photosynthesis is the production of plants' food. This is a very basic concept that I'm sure everyone knows. Uh, this has been discussed since we were in elementary, continually discussed and elaborated upon junior high school. So photosynthesis is still the same concept that we all know and love. So aside from that, photosynthesis is split into two main reactions, though those are the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. So we'll tackle that later. And generally, photosynthesis uses sunlight and carbon dioxide to create byproducts that are um, that are important to us and important to them as well. So those main byproducts are glucose, oxygen, and energy. The glucose is their food. The energy is what um, enables the processes to continue, and the oxygen is secreted by them so that we can breathe. So aside from that, let's talk about what photosynthesis needs. So the photosynthesis needs, as I mentioned earlier, it uses sunlight. So sunlight is actually as a form of visible light. So visible light is a frequency of light which the human eye can see. So visible light, um, it's a frequency of light that the human eye can see. And aside from that, the visible light na inaabsorb ng plants para magkaroon ng photosynthesis is what we is in the color of red and blue. So yung red and blue ang inaabsorb ng plant, and then yung green ang nire-reflect niya. So bakit green yung nire-reflect niya? So as we can all see that most plants, most plants, most plants reflect or are colored green. So why is it colored green? So in our eyes, the color that we see is the color that is being reflected. The color that we do not see is the color that is being absorbed. The same applies for plants. The color that we see is usually um, in the color of green. So therefore, the color or the visible light that is being reflected is the uh, is is the is the green wavelength of the visible light. So let's move on to the structure that actually processes this, and that is the chloroplast. So what are chloroplasts? Well, chloroplasts are a structure found in the plants, of course. So the chloroplast provides a pigment as well, and aside from that, there are different components within the chloroplast. So let's dive into it. So hindi kayo malito later on. So the first up, we have the outer membrane. It's the outer shell of chloroplast. So between the outer membrane, we also have the inner membrane. So that's the inner lining of a chloroplast to keep the liquid inside of it. So between those two, sa pagitan nilang dalawa, may space between them. So hindi sila totally magkadikit. So aside from that, we have what we call as the stroma. Now, the stroma is the actual liquid within the chloroplast. It's not just the floor of the chloroplast. So uh, may liquid dyan sa chloroplast, and it's usually filled with hydrogen ions and whatnot. Aside from that, we have what we call as a thylakoid. Now, the thylakoid is this coin-like structure where the actual photosynthesis begins. So dito pumapasok si photons, gets converted. We'll discuss about that later. So a stack of thylakoid is what we call as a granum. Multiple granums are called as grana. And those grana are interconnected or interlinked with what we call as the stroma lamella. So ayun. Again, to recap, this part, thylakoid is a single coin. A granum is a stack of coins, and the grana are multiple stacks of coins. So that's that. So let's proceed to the the light-dependent reaction of the photosynthesis, or the first part of the photosynthesis. So Now, the light-dependent reaction, as its name suggests, it depends on light. It needs light for it to occur. So, in the light-dependent reaction, this is the process wherein the plants absorb sunlight to produce different energies, which it will use throughout various cycles. Now, this reaction occurs in the thylakoid, so it's the first step of the photosynthesis, in wherein the light is enters through the thylakoid and is processed by the photosystem too. And then after it enters the thylakoid through the photosystem too. What happens next is it goes through different um, uh, processes. Specifically, it splits water that is inside of the plant. Once it splits water, the molecules that it split into will be transported across the plant. So next up, we have the electron transport chain in the photosynthesis. So yun nga, as I mentioned earlier, may mga molecules na split. Dun sa mga molecules na yun, kailangan siyang i-transport throughout the plant and also to complete photosynthesis. So the electron transport chain in the photosynthesis begins with photosystem 2. Yeah, the light waves that enter photosystem 2 have a wavelength of 680 nanometers. So that's the most important thing to remember. It's 680 nanometers. And bakit yung photosystem 2? So historically speaking, um, yung first part ng electron transport chain was not discovered yet early on. So, hindi na-discover yung first part ng electron transport chain ng photosystem kaagad. So, that's why it's called as the photosystem 2. Ngayon, yung photosystem 1, which we'll tackle later, yun yung unang half na na-discover sa electron transport chain. So, bakit ganon? Bakit ganon? Just so happens na unang na-discover yung photosystem 2. Aside from that, um, when they were experimenting and doing the discoveries, nalaman nila na parang there's a more bigger picture to this. Kaya parang naghanap sila and then eventually they discovered photosystem 2. So the photosystem 1 and 2 are where the lights pass through. So ang photosystem, essentially, they are the channels for light to pass through para makapasok sa thylakoid. Ngayon, pag nakapasok si light, specifically si photons, pag nakapasok na si photons dun sa different um dun sa photosystems, it enters it enters the thylakoid to either recharge or split a molecule. So for the photosystem 2, it splits the water molecules, and ngayon sa photosystem 1, its primarily purpose is to recharge electrons. So in the electron transport chain, we also have two more, uh, two more, two more processes. Actually, not two, three more processes or proteins na kailangan daanan. So that is the plastoquinone, the cytochrome, and the plantocyanin. Apologies for the PPT, it's incorrectly labeled. So the plastoquinine, that is this one. This is where the energy, the electrons pass through, and then the cytochrome is where it's also pass through. And same goes for plantocyanin. It's just proteins for energies to pass through. Ngayon, bakit may photosystem 1? So as we can see, transport yung electron, the color blue, this one. Look at my, if you could look at my cursor and the image over here. The electrons are being transported throughout the different proteins, as well as the hydrogen. So bakit gano'n? So bakit siya kailangan ng photosystem again? So kailangan siya ng photosystem again because of when we transport when we transport things, um, they tend to lose energy. Parang tayo, naglakad tayo na malayo or tumakbo na malayo, tumakbo na mabilis, ang tendency ay nawawalan tayo ng energy. So it needs to be re-energized. So for the electrons to be re-energized, that's when the photosystem one enters into play. So the photosystem one, the the photons enter the photosystem. Specifically, the photosystem only entertains or ang mga pinapapasok niya lang ng photos or light waves have a measurement of 700 nanometers. So that's once it enters, it gets re-energized, the electrons get re-energized for it to be um, used in the next processes. So next up, we have what we call as the photolysis. Now, what is a photolysis? So earlier na-tackle ko na to. So photolysis is the process wherein the molecules split through the use of light. So in the example on the right side, it's the photolysis occurs in the first part of the electron transport chain sa photosystem 2. Dun sa photosystem 2, nakapasok na si photons. Pagkapasok ni photons, isi-split niya si H2O or water. So, split niya si water. So, pagkahati niya kay water, ang nangyayari kay water is nakahati siya sa tatlo. Kay oxygen gas, kay hydrogen, and kay electrons. Si hydrogen and the electrons, siya ay nagtra-transport within the thylakoid, within the entire process, and then O2 gets ejected. So next up, we have what we call as the phosphorylation, photophosphorylation. So photophosphorylation is the process of turning ADP into ATP with the help of light. So that's basically it's just a basic concept of creating energy, which will be used in the next processes that are going to be discussed. And for the last part, we'll be discussing about the light independent reaction. So this is just brief um, a brief touch up on the light-independent reaction. So the light-dependent reaction is also known as the Calvin cycle. So in Calvin cycle, it occurs in the storm of the chloroplast and does not directly require sunlight. So um, let's highlight the word not directly require sunlight. So in our previous slides, we saw that the light-dependent reaction needs sunlight to be able to produce energy. And while the light-independent reaction does not require light in its formula, it does however need the energy produced in the light-dependent reaction for it to function, for it to start. So, yung mga energy na na-produce natin ng light-dependent reaction, siya din yung kailangan ni light-independent reaction. And same goes, yung mga energies na kailangan ni light-independent reaction, siya din yung kailangan ni light-dependent reaction to start. So that's primarily it. Let's have a short summary about our topic. The light enters the photosystem 2. The light that enters that would split a water from it. The light would split the water, so the water would become electrons, hydrogen, and then oxygen. So after that, the electrons get transported to the what we call as the plastoquinone. After it gets transported to plastoquinone, it enters the cytochrome complex. Then once it enters the cytochrome complex, the electrons move to the plastocyanine. Once it moves to the plastocyanine, it moves to the photosystem 1. So after so much travel between the photosystem 1 and the photosystem 2 and the photosystem 1, the electrons start to or have already lost their energy. So to restore those energies so that the electricity could be re-excited or could be re-energized, the photosystem 1 would let in uh, photons, would let in light in specifically 700 nanometers. The light that it allows to be entered is specifically only 700 nanometers, and then once it enters um, the photosystem 1, it re-energizes the electrons. Once the electrons are re-energized, they move to the what we call as the ferredoxine. Once the ferredoxines, it passes through the ferredoxine, it begins to create what we call as the NADPH. Once the NADPH is also created, ATP, on the other hand, is simultaneously being created with the help of what we call as the uh, proton gradient. So the proton gradient is when the excess the excess hydrogen inside of the thyroid space moves outside through the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase has a ADP molecule waiting on the outside of the ATP synthase. Once the ADP synthase gets has a hydrogen ion passing it by, the ADP would then get charged. Once the ADP is charged, a phosphorus molecule would then bind to the ADP, and it would be then become ATP, the NADPH, and the ATP will then be used for the Calvin cycle. So, in short summary, that's the input is the light, water, ADP, and NADP plus. The output is oxygen, NADPH, and ADP. So that's primarily it. Thank you, Erudites, for watching, and I'll catch you next time.